Let's talk about the play Oedipus Tyrannos by Sophocles, often translated as Oedipus Rex or Oedipus the King. We will talk about the context for Greek theater, Oedipus as a mythological character, some translation issues, timeline before the play and during the play, the Greek concept of fate, and terms hamartia, peripecia, catharsis, and a bit about the Freudian Oedipus complex. Greek theater was a religious ritual and also a play competition. Dionysus was the god it honored. He was the god of ritual madness and the god of wine, but not the god of drunkenness. This was wine in its kind of medicinal form as pain relief or as a social lubricant. The prize was given for the best set of 4 plays, 3 tragedies on a particular theme, and a related sort of comic satirical play called a satyr play. And Sophocles, the author of Oedipus Tyrannos, won this contest 24 out of 30 times. And that's a lot of plays. And when he didn't win, he came in second place. Of those, over 100 plays that he entered over 30 years in this contest, we have just 7 of them. Sophocles and his fellow playwrights would focus on the current events of the day, and that was risky because if you speak truth to the power, you get in trouble. But they kind of softened their criticism of current events by setting their plays in mythological settings. Here's a diagram of a Greek theater, the theatron where people sat. The skena is the a static backdrop, not so much like a colored cloth backdrop, but just a building with doors that would typically represent the protagonist's house. The orchestra, that central circular space, is for the dancing space where the chorus would perform, chanting and moving in a kind of ritual, ceremonial unison. I like thinking of perhaps the Oompa Loompas, who would come out. They're not really trained dancers in the movies, but they would move together and sing songs that comment on the action that just took place. The actors would wear a static mask that would show an exaggerated facial expression that you could kind of read from a great distance. In a similar way, their masks had a mouthpiece that could amplify their words. And they also wore these platform sandals that would, allow you to see them over other people's heads. So all these things were designed to kind of make this whole experience larger than life. On stage, you would have the chorus, a chorus leader, and just 1 to 3 more characters. It was really more of a ceremony than a realistic portrayal of how actual people would talk. The Greek philosopher Aristotle defined tragedy as an enactment of a deed that is important and complete, of a certain magnitude, using enriched, ornamented language, not everyday speech. The tragedy has to be enacted, not merely recited, and the content of the play should invoke the emotions of pity and fear, and the conclusion should offer the audience a release, a purgation called catharsis. We'll talk a little bit more about that term later. In the classical world, Oedipus was already a well-known character before Sophocles wrote this play. Think Batman or Wonder Woman. Any individual movie based on those characters happens in a context in which we already know those characters, at least the basic outline of their stories. Here we have some artwork. This is not a representation of an event from the play. This is a different artist's representation of Oedipus's encounter with the Sphinx. We'll talk a little bit more about the Sphinx. The backstory for Oedipus, the name Oedipus means swollen foot. Does he limp? This, swollen foot character is walking along the road and he confronts Laius in a chariot who doesn't yield his place on the road. And to the ancient Greeks, the fact that Oedipus killed Laius doesn't necessarily mean Oedipus did anything wrong. Laius was arrogant not to yield the road to a pedestrian, and the ancient Greeks may very well have thought that Oedipus, because he won this conflict and killed everybody except one messenger, one witness who escaped, maybe that means he's the better man. At any rate, Oedipus defeats the Sphinx, he weds Jocasta, the people of Thebes acclaim him as their ruler. That's what the play title looks like in Greek. I'm not going to try to pronounce it, but we would sort of transliterate it to Oedipus Tyrannos. And that word Tyrannos, tyrant, uh, we should really translate that as a ruler by strength. To Sophocles, the word tyrant was not negative, not like a cruel despot. It was a neutral word for a person who rules because they're strong. That brings us to the idea that the translation that you read can really affect your understanding of the meaning of the play. So if we don't translate Oedipus Tyrannos as Oedipus the King, then we mention, well, the play mentions Oedipus's household and his seat of power. It describes him wearing a golden wreath, and Jocasta is the widow of the former leader. And these words emphasize that Oedipus did not inherit Thebes because he married into the royal family. He proved himself individually by defeating the Sphinx. But if you take the translation Oedipus Rex, then the household becomes a palace, and the seat is a throne, and the wreath is a crown, and Jocasta is the queen. And this set of words, I think, would, when you look at this play from a global perspective, would sort of show the bias of British English, the United Kingdom, the idea that British translations would normalize the idea of the monarchy, whereas I think American translations, the American audiences and editors and translators would be sort of trained culturally to question the idea that it's a good thing to have rule passed on hereditarily rather than through a democratic process. Okay, a quick timeline. Before the play even begins, we've learned that Laius, who is the ruler of Thebes, consults an oracle, and the oracle tells him, your son will kill you and marry your wife. To avoid this fate, Laius orders Jocasta to kill their baby son. Jocasta can't do it and asks a servant to do it. The servant can't do it and passes the baby on to the Corinthian shepherd. The Corinthian shepherd doesn't tell Polybus and Merope, that is the rulers of nearby Corinth, that shepherd doesn't tell them where the baby comes from. And so Polybus and Merope raise Oedipus as their own child, and Oedipus has no idea where he came from. When Oedipus is a young man, he encounters a drunken stranger who says, you're not who you think you are. And this accusation unsettles Oedipus. He asks his foster parents to explain, but they won't tell him anything. So Oedipus decides to go consult an oracle. And the oracle that he receives says, you will kill your dad and marry your mom. Horrified, Oedipus runs away from Corinth to avoid this prophecy, and he runs smack into Laius, killing him, thereby fulfilling that part of the prophecy. The one surviving witness blames a gang of robbers. But anyway, Oedipus continues on towards Thebes. He solves the riddle of the Sphinx, and the backstory is that the Sphinx is a monster punishing Thebes for the sins of Laius, and the audience would know the mythological character Laius, and they would know about his sins, but I'm not going to talk about them here. The people acclaim Oedipus as their new ruler. He marries Jocasta. I'm not really entirely sure what order those events happen. Oedipus is ruling not because he married the queen, but because he earned the right to rule by defeating the Sphinx, and also by some extent proving that he's a better fighter than Laius was. Now, during the play, and the play happens in real time, that is, we're watching, 90 minutes or so of real time of the life of a man who goes from a position of power to basically nothing. The play begins with Oedipus vowing to lift the curse that's on Thebes, and the chorus explains what that curse is. Creon has been sent to the oracle and comes back saying, the oracle told him, your city is cursed because it's harboring the killer of Laius who has not been punished, and you have to banish this killer in order for Thebes to go back to normal. And perfectly sensibly, Oedipus vows, I will fight on Laius's behalf as if this matter concerned my father. And that's a wonderful bit of irony. The audience already knows that Oedipus is the son of Laius and Oedipus does not realize the irony of his own statement. The chorus leader wisely cautions Oedipus, saying, the humble thing to do is to consult the god Apollo. through his prophet Tiresias. Tiresias is rather reluctant to speak. He speaks only after Oedipus threatens him because he knows full well what he has to say is bad news. Tiresias tells the truth. You yourself are the very man that you seek. Tiresias also tells him you have no idea how bad things are. One of Oedipus's character flaws, and I don't think this is necessarily a flaw that makes him deserve his suffering, but Oedipus does react negatively. He really bullies and kind of rails against Tiresias. He accuses Creon and Tiresias of plotting together against his authority, and that is not a good choice of his reaction. Anyway, Jocasta scolds the men for quarreling, and she says, don't take these oracles so seriously. There is this oracle that I got from Laius that your son will kill you and marry your wife. And that oracle didn't come true because I just killed the baby. So Jocasta is telling Oedipus what she thinks is good news, which is it's possible to avoid your fate. Oedipus, however, learns from Jocasta some new details, and he asks for that one surviving witness. And the chorus reacts, kind of gives a kind of sermon, letting the audience know the proper way to respond in such a situation. Jocasta, who's worried at this point, makes an offering to Apollo. And remember, this play was part of a religious ritual, so she's not just play acting. The character Jocasta really is doing something that the audience felt would please the god Apollo. So they're participating in a form of community worship. A messenger from Corinth arrives saying Polybus has died naturally. And this is good news to Oedipus. He believes that this shows him that he's avoided the prophecy. So in the middle of this, happy moment, the messenger says, hey, I've got even more good news. This guy Polybus, you don't have to be sad. He wasn't really your dad. I gave you to Polybus. And Oedipus, Jocasta, chorus there, the messenger is kind of wondering why everybody responds the way they do, because he thinks it's good news. Well, Oedipus says, I've got to get to the bottom of this. He's very curious. Jocasta puts all the pieces together, and she tells her husband and son, I hope you never learn the truth, and she exits. Oedipus does not follow her. He's really grasping at straws at this point. That old shepherd confirms the messenger's story, and that's the last nail in the coffin. Oedipus exits. The chorus reacts ritually to Oedipus's shock and lament, and his lament. One of the characteristics of Greek theater is that violence happens off stage. A different servant arrives to say he's just seen that Jocasta has hung herself, and that Oedipus has taken jewelry from Jocasta and poked his own eyes out. Oedipus, who, when he had his eyes, could not see the truth, now that he knows the truth, does not want to have to look on the faces of his parents in the afterlife. And that's why he says he blinds himself. And his speeches are a source of some real psychological depth that give us a glimpse into what people from, over 2,000 years ago thought about their internal lives and grief and their psychological makeup. Creon, then, being a good ruler, he's not cruel, but he's firm. He knows that the oracle has said the way to restore Thebes is to banish the killer of Laius, who has currently been unpunished. So he banishes Oedipus. The audience gets to see Oedipus lamenting quite pitiably. He grieves. He asks for his children to be brought to him, and he touches them. They have no lines. He can't see them. It's a very pitiful experience. And Oedipus finally leaves. The chorus then asks the audience to consider the fate of Oedipus, the famous riddle solver, a powerful man envied by all, now brought this low.